Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to our CEO course hosted by Bob Gampa and myself. Today we're going to talk about extraordinary negotiating skills. And our special guest is Steve Rafsky. And Steve, would you first talk briefly about your career?
Well, I have thank you. Welcome. Hello to John and everybody. So everyone knows, I'm in my career before working with Loyalty, I've only worked for two companies in 45 years. The first 20 years I was in a public company I started with right out of school. And for today's topic, that's where I probably started learning most of my negotiating skills. I'll come back to what that was there 20 years, started as an internal auditor, became county manager, controller. We called them treasurers, not CFOs back then. Started doing mergers, acquisitions, and all kinds of things like that for the company. Wanted to get out and do my own accounting thing. Started my own accounting firm, then associated with a company called Paget. Before I knew it, I was the CEO there. It was a turnaround. And we turned Paget into a very successful franchise model with over 300 locations, almost 400 locations throughout the United States and Canada. Also turned that into a very profitable, successful outfit. I thought I was going to be traveling right now, and I met John a few years ago, got excited about this project. I told my wife the other day that he must have known a pandemic was coming, and we couldn't be traveling anyway. So here we are having fun with Loyalty. That's a quick intro.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And how many business negotiations do you think you've been in?
Hundreds. I've never counted them, but I bet you at least 200.
So, okay. So why don't you take us through the key points, the important points?
And there are several things I'd like to point out, and hopefully if people on the call finds one of them a little nugget, then we had a successful day. But to start with, if you're going to enter negotiations, there's a couple of things we need to know. And the first thing you need to know is, what are you negotiating and what are your limits? And I'll come back to that. And then what is the win? How do you get to the win? And I think the two things that are the most important part on your side of the table is you have to be credible and you have to be confident. When it comes to credibility, first, you have to do your homework. Second, you've got to be sincere about your approach. You've got to be yourself. And thirdly, you've got to establish why the other side, you got to establish why you'll be a great buyer, a great partner, or a customer, so the other side wants to do business with you. That's on the credibility side. But back to confidence for a second. Again, do your homework. Do it again and again so you know what you're doing. Know your authority and know your limits to what you can do up front. Don't be wishy-washy. Believe in what you're trying to negotiate and be honest and open. Help the other party help you. So that's as a premise, credibility and confidence. Now, if I can just delve into a couple of other things, the result needs to be a win-win for both sides. I have never entered a negotiation thinking I'm going to hurt them and help me. So if you can't enter into a win-win, you're in the wrong place. And remember, we're going to be doing business in most negotiations. You're going to be doing business with the other party. So it's really got to work for both sides. And then lastly, as far as the general things, is you got to think outside the box. We all talk about thinking outside the box. When you're negotiating, you learn it better. And when I say think out of the box, so often, as I've seen the other side, it's all about money. I like to look at other things beside money. Maybe it's helping them get into a market in a way they never thought of. Maybe it's about adding credibility to who they are, or their program, their products, or results. Sometimes the thing of value is not the deal on the table, but the things around the deal on the table. So adding credibility to their program or to who we are together is usually a very big thing that I've learned over the years. And I'm going to go on, John, unless you stop me, because I'd like to get into some best practices, if that's okay.
Okay, well, yeah, go ahead.
All right. So as I already said, you have to believe in what you're trying to negotiate. I always do my homework. I always make sure that I understand why I'm in the negotiation so I can speak with authority. I can speak with confidence. The second thing, you've got to see where the extraordinary part of the opportunity is. So I always not look for, okay, it's another transaction. I look for, why is this extraordinary? What can we do to turn this into something bigger than what we all think it is today? But then I follow certain key tactics, and that's what I really wanted to spend a few minutes on. The first thing is, you've really got to listen more than you speak. Negotiation is more about learning. I learned a long time ago, I only know one thing about the other side when I walk in. And I teach this all the time. The only thing I know about the other side is we're entering some kind of discussion. And that's all I know. I don't know anything else. So you've got to listen more than you speak, because you don't know what they're going to put forth to you. Second, have a vision of where this is going. Size doesn't matter, potential does. So often negotiations break down because we think of today instead of where we could be tomorrow. So I always look at it from a visionary point of view, not a matter-of-fact point of view. Third, make sure you present in a manner that says you're serious yet positive. You can't be too angry, too hungry when you're presenting. So being serious, being positive, but not hungry. In other words, you have to present yourself, because it has to be reality that you don't want the transaction as much as they do. Even if you do, you've got to do your negotiations as if they want it more than you. You only offer or promise what you can deliver is the next point. That gets back to credibility and things. So often people throw things on the table that they can't put together, they can't deliver. I have never been accused of backing down from something I put on the table. So not only doing your homework, knowing your authority, that's where these things all tie in, but only offer, only promise what you know you can deliver. One of the hardest things to learn, but one of the most effective things I have found, is being willing to walk out or delay. If you're more anxious, if you're not willing to say, we need to take a pause or let's think about it, you're not necessarily going to get to the best deal. And I'm going through these points. We'll come back and talk about some of these in a moment. One of the things I'd like to encourage people to think about, when you're going through a negotiation process, you're dealing with things that sound like they're the same, but they're very different. Sometimes you hear objections that are really either a hurdle or a put-off. And I think for successful negotiations, learning the difference between a hurdle and a put-off is very critical. So what do I mean by that? A hurdle is something that you really do need to get over to get to the deal. A put-off is something that's not answered because either they don't know or don't want to tell you. And one of my favorite things when I'm interested in determining hurdles and put-offs is a question that I've used for 20 years. I would think I'm tired of, and I like it every time I do it. And it's really simple. If it wasn't for whatever they just said, is there anything else that would prevent us from moving forward? And you know why I like that? I'm going to get a little bit into that tactic, because they're always going to get to that. And if it's a hurdle, we're going to solve it and move on. But if they bring up the next similar thing, then what I find out, or what you'll find out, is that really wasn't a hurdle, it was a put-off, because now there's another hurdle. Because remember, I said, if it wasn't for this, is there anything else? And they always say no. And what do you think I'm going to do again? I'm going to say, now, thank you for raising that. But is there any, if it wasn't for this, is there anything else that prevents us from getting our deal done? And getting used to that approach helps you determine hurdles versus put-offs or getting to the real deal. But maybe the most important thing I saved for last to think about is plan and control the process. You first have to establish that you're speaking with the real decision maker on the other side. There's no use to be negotiating with someone who can't make a decision or have access to the real decision maker. Also, I believe at the very beginning, you need to establish a timeline that meets the project and our objectives, and then control the process to the best of your ability to make that timeline happen. And maybe the most critical thing is to understand early on the other side's decision-making process. And not only understand it, but then become part of it. And that's the hard part. How do you become a part of it? Most negotiations don't happen in one 5-minute call. So before you end that meeting you're at, confirm your next steps, confirm their next steps. Set the next meeting time. But then confirm your to-dos and deliverables as well. And then stick your nose into theirs a little bit. I always like to say, how can I help you do your job? And then I'll tell you how you can help me get mine done. I really don't need them to help me because I know what I'm doing. And that sounds arrogant, but I enter again with authority, with knowledge. I've done my homework, but usually the other side doesn't do that. They don't prepare. And I want to be part of that process going forward so we get deliverables done. So again, follow those tactics, be a win-win approach. Don't want it more than them. Be willing to walk, but look for a yes, and follow a process of credibility and confidence.
We lost you.
What?
We lost your sound, or I did.
I can still
Go ahead,
hear.
go ahead, Steve.
Okay. And that gets through that. Now, by the way, I'm just going to share a couple little examples. And it doesn't always have to be.
Steve, wait, let's Bob and I weigh
Okay.
in on what you said, and then we'll go into examples.
Okay.
Because I wanted to, I want to emphasize a couple things you said and introduce another couple things. Number one, I love the philosophy that you talk less. That to my belief is that whoever talks most generally loses the battle. So I think you need to keep your cards close to your vest and talk less and ask more. So the way you talk less is you ask more. So I think that's very, very important. One tip that I commonly, or mistake I commonly see, is that in a negotiation, you try never to tell the other side, oh, that's really great for me, right? So because that gives them an upper hand in the negotiation. So you try never to say that. You never say, oh, wow, that's really good for me. I never thought of that. That's just something that can only work against you. And one thing that I found in negotiations, that another mistake is that too often people don't get all the information before making the offer or the decision. They get insufficient information. So they make an offer, it's accepted, and then there's all these by the ways. By the way, we have to have this. Oh, by the way, I have to get my brother's approval. By the way, there's all these by the ways. So make sure that you're exhaustive in getting all the information when you're negotiating. And I love what you said about preparation, that people don't think about that. Whoever is most prepared is most likely to get the best deal. And finally, I'm not sure if I agreed with everything you said except for one thing, and I'm not sure we disagree on this, but you were talking about being visionary and walking in with a vision. I tend to walk in without having decided what the best deal is. So I'm not sure exactly what you meant, but my philosophy is that I'm going to go in with an open mind. And while I think this might be the best deal, I try not to buy into that. I try not to go in with foregone conclusions that this is what the deal's going to look like. So are we in agreement, or do you have, do you feel the opposite on that one?
No. We're very aligned. When I'm talking about be visionary, sometimes you get to a hurdle that's hard to solve. And that's because we're only thinking about what's before us today. That's when you decide, where could this go? And is this something that's worth overcoming or not? So yeah, no, we're fully aligned. And visionary may be the wrong word because it's nondescript, but no, I like what you said.
Okay. Bob, how do you feel? Which of this is most important to you, and have we missed anything?
No, I think we just went through an MBA class in a few minutes with the two of you. I think it's really good points. I'm looking forward to listening to it again.
Awesome. So, well, let's and Bob, how many business negotiations have you been in?
Not as many as I'd like to think I have. Probably 50 to 100, maybe.
Good. So between us, we've had 500 to 1,000 negotiations in our lives. So we've had a lot of experience. And Steve, you wanted to go through some examples. Give us, why don't you give us one example, and then I'll give an example, and if you want, Bob, you can give an example, and then we'll come back to you, Steve, and you can give another example.
Well, and so I'm going to start with one of the biggest transactions I ever did. And just to put it in perspective, it was $1.4 billion. And that's when I was in my first company, the public company. Now, I was given the job of acquiring a major company. Obviously, $1.4 billion 20 years ago was still a lot of money. And we were at an impasse. We were at an absolute impasse. And not only were we at an impasse, but I was starting to think the other side was not genuine and we were wasting our time. And it was about lunchtime and we were supposed to go to lunch together. And I said to the other side in this big conference room, you know what? I think we will go to lunch separately. And in fact, let's have a short lunch. Let's be back in a half hour. And if you're not willing to accept what we have on the table, just don't come back from lunch. And if you are, we'll continue. And as we were walking out, one of the key people on my side of the table came to me and he said, I didn't know you had that much authority, because the chairman of the board sent us up there to get this done. I turned to him and I said, I don't. The reason I said we're going to go out of the room is I got to call corporate to let them know what I just did, and maybe I'll get fired. But the good news is, remember I said early on, know what your authority is. We called our CEO and he said we did the right thing. And more importantly, the other side called me before we went to lunch and said, no, we'd like to have lunch together, and you're right. And we ended up doing the deal over lunch. So that's what I mean by being willing to walk, know your authority. It's a great example. The deal we did was we acquired Filings of Boston and Sanger Harris and Foley's of Texas, and merged the two Texas companies. And that's what took me to Boston, because we succeeded. So that's an example of being willing to walk and know your authority.
Great. Let me talk about my effort to get into Walmart when I was at Jackson Hewitt in 1992 we learned that H&R Block was putting about 100 locations, kiosks in Walmart. And at Jackson Hewitt, number 2 largest tax company at the time and still today, we were envious of that because H&R Block had a great relationship with Sears and was very successful in about 800 Sears stores. And of course, Walmart had already had double the amount of Sears location, and the foot traffic of a Walmart was 2 to 3 times what the foot traffic of a Sears was. So we really wanted that deal. So in preparation, and you talked earlier about preparation. In preparation, the first thing we did is invited the local Walmart manager of the Walmart store here in Virginia Beach. We invited him to lunch, and we quizzed him and got information, and we asked for a meeting. And we used that information that we gleaned from that lunch, and were able to get a meeting at headquarters in Bentonville. Well, the meeting went fairly well. During the meeting, they gave us credibility. They said, well, we're testing with H&R Block, and we asked them to test with us. And I said, you know, the difference between us, Jackson Hewitt, and H&R Block is when they're in every small town in America. So if you go to Bentonville, Arkansas, where they're headquartered, everyone in town knows there's an H&R Block there. So if H&R Block goes into Walmart, then they're kind of cannibalizing the market. And however, if you allow us to put a Jackson Hewitt in, then we're going to be new in town, so we're competitors. So by definition, we should do better. And they then said, before we even left the building, they said, well, we're not even sure if we like the tax business. And so we're not ready to test with another competitor. And but so that was sad. But the good news is that made me excited. They said, however, if we get into an industry, we would like to have 2 vendors. And I knew there was only 2 national vendors in the country. It was, at the time, it was H&R Block and Jackson Hewitt. So I knew I was in good position unless Block ruined it for me. Unless Block did such a poor job that they said, well, we'll never want to be in the tax business. So so one of the things, for sure, we wanted to have kiosks in Walmart. And but a couple of opportunities spun out of that. They liked us enough that they put us in touch with the Sam's Club management, and we immediately made a deal to test in Sam's Club. So now we had not only an opportunity to test a whole new concept in an extraordinary successful chain, but we got to show Walmart what we could do versus what H&R Block was doing. And then we got a second opportunity because they were testing a concept of a copy, pack, and ship, it was called. And so it was kind of a mailbox, et cetera, as it said, a shipping company copying copies and so forth inside of Walmart. And I talked him into agreeing that it would be good to test in that year-round facility to add tax preparation into that. And then we acquired that small company. So it was about a dozen locations and expanded that. So we're testing in Sam's Club. We got into Walmart in the copy, pack, and ship locations. And what happened, within 2 years, they came to us, H&R Block in December of 1994. They were set to go into 150 locations. And at the last minute, H&R Block went to Walmart and said, oh, we're not going to be able to go into those 150. We're only going to go into 100. And so Walmart called us up and said, can you take any of these stores? We have store managers that want us to go into the stores, and they're very disappointed. And so we were able to get into about 18 of the 50 locations. And they called us very late. It was like almost Christmas when they called up, and we were moved very quickly and did as much as we could because we always wanted to show what we could do. And so it worked out extremely well. Within 2 years, H&R Block left Walmart, and today the only national company inside of Walmart in 3,000 locations is Jackson Hewitt. And so they have a virtual monopoly of the Walmart relationship. And it started out with a no, we worked our way around the obstacles, and were able to eventually win the day. And so that's good and bad, because at our tax organizations at Loyalty, we want to get into Walmart, and I believe that we'll figure a way to do it. We're still in constant contact with them. We're working on some plans. I'm not going to share how we're doing it or what we're working at it, but my goal is to grab that relationship back and have 3,000 ATAXs in Walmart locations. Bob, any favorite negotiations that come to mind?
I don't, but I not at the moment, but I have a question that to me is more important than that, to share that with you guys. And it is, what are one example or more of a time when you really wanted to win a negotiation, but you walked away from it because of something you discovered?
Steve?
Well, that's a great question. As a matter of fact, there's several things that come to mind. But first, the one thing, I don't want to say what the company was because of what I'm about to say, but the one that comes to mind first is a company I was negotiating when we found out that there were improprieties going on the other side. And meaning we were trying to acquire a company, and we thought some of their business practices were not ethical, if not legal. So it was an easy one to walk away. It was a hard one. We really wanted to be in that market, but we decided we were ethics and legality, and it was really ethics drove the deal. We walked away because we didn't think they were ethical enough to put our name with. And I think that is a standard that everyone should be willing to do. But just also another one that we walked away, and this I don't mind, this is back to that company. We had a mission to get into, B. Altman was a company on Fifth Avenue across from the Empire State Building, and that was available, and we were one of the companies negotiating to acquire that company. And we learned that that building had so many problems that their maintenance cost was higher than the Empire State Building across the street. And although we wanted to be in that building so bad, we decided the cost and all finally got to our head, and we walked away from that. The company that bought them, by the way, went bankrupt. So we always felt good that we never went to that location. So one is ethics and one is your analysis got us to those conclusions.
So, Steve, many of your negotiations were in acquiring companies.
Right.
And what percentage of the time did when you got in there, you acquired the company, you came in the door, what percentage of the time was it as good as they said it was going to be?
Yeah. Well, let me answer that in two parts. I would say it's single digit when it was as good as they said it was, but a high percentage were what we analyzed before we said yes.
So single digit means over 90% of the deals that you entered, it wasn't as good as they said it was, made it out to be.
Absolutely true.
And you have to go into a negotiation and include that in the price you pay. You know, when we bought in 1982, we bought Mel Jackson Tax Service, and we bought 6 offices from his widow, and she was actually attending church school and becoming a preacher, and she had 2 top people. One was named Audrey and one was named Brenda. And she said they ran the operation for her deceased spouse, and they were going to stay with the company. They wanted to be there forever. They loved the industry. They loved the company. And so we were going to go in there and have these 2 experienced, well-known managers that were going to assist us in building the company. Well, we closed on Friday, came into the office on Monday, and within the first minute, both of them resigned. not only did they both resign, but each of them competed. Each of them had a name amongst the customers. There was 11,000 customers in these 6 offices, and many of the customers knew personally Audrey and Brenda, and so that was a blow immediately. And normally you get blows not that bad, but you normally, after you acquire something, stuff happens that the owners didn't tell you was going to happen in the first place. Has that happened to you? That we've had situations where often where you get a non-compete from the owner, and then the tax preparer or a tax preparer 2 years ago has the customer list and competes. So you have to kind of use that in your calculation of what each opportunity, each negotiation is worth.
Yeah, and you asked me how many negotiations I've done, and I didn't include things like we converted 200 accounting practices into our system over the years. And each of those is a negotiation. And when you're talking about non-competes and all, my gosh, you're hitting a sweet spot. It's something you deal with a lot. And yes, you've got to build it into your calculation, and you have to be prepared to make sure if something goes awry, you address it right on and correct it.
So that gets me to ask you to comment, because negotiation is more common on a daily basis than I think most of us believe or understand. And what I know about John Hewitt and what I'm learning about Steve Rafsky is a CEO's point in negotiation is growth, always growth. And John, I think you could help people understand how sometimes you take what appears to be a short-term loss for a long-term gain in bringing in ARs and single and multi-unit operators.
Absolutely. When in the opportunities like I even described the Walmart opportunity and the fact that that happened in that process. We lost money in Sam's Club. We lost money when we had to open 18 locations within 2 weeks. That tax season, we lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But we had the long-term view that today there are 3,000 Jackson Hewitts doing $1 million, $10 million a year in revenue for the last 20 years, because we made that sacrifice and we made that commitment and went the extra mile and negotiated a deal that in the short term cost us money, but with a long-term vision of the great opportunity to grow the business. And out of the 6,000 Jackson Hewitt stores today, 3,000 are in Walmart.
And I think the key for this CEO call is that the focus of the CEO always must be, without exception, long-term.
Exactly. So too many. That's a topic for another call. Is that people or CEOs and leaders and managers they choke off the future by trying to get every dollar today. Yeah. And that's we're going to talk about that in a later lesson about the lifetime value of a customer, right? The lifetime value of a customer. The customer's value isn't the $200 they pay you this year. It's how many years they're going to come back, how many years they're going to refer customers, and so forth. And so absolutely, that's incredibly important if you're going to build something extraordinary.
I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
I think you said something a minute ago that's really resonating too, or in your question, and that is that negotiations aren't always for the multi-million-dollar deal. Our everyday negotiations, we're doing it every day. And by the way, we do it at home too. I'm going to digress for a second. I have a son who was not the best student, but he wanted to go out of state for college. I made a negotiation with him, and it was really simple. We're going to put your school on loans. And if you get a degree, mom and dad are going to pay off your loans on graduation day. if you don't get a degree, you're going to have loans to take with you. By God, he got a degree because halfway through that, he told me he couldn't afford to leave school. So, negotiations, if we do things in a win-win situation, we didn't want to get out of paying those loans. We wanted him to get a degree. And that was thinking of the future, but it's in everyday life. And those are, it's not always the billion-dollar company. John,
Yeah, both of you are married. Bob, how often do you have to negotiate with your wife?
Constantly. Constantly.
Well, I don't negotiate constantly, just about 20 times a day.
Do you ever win?
Well, I let her think she wins, even though I know I do. No, I never win.
Do you have other examples that are instructive that come to mind, Steve?
I would like to share a more real-time one. We Loyalty just finished negotiating a new contract with a vendor, a partner that we acquired by having a brand come in. And it took a long time to get there. And the reason it took a long time is when we finally looked at the agreements and all, we couldn't understand what we acquired. What we inherited with this merger. So it took us over a month to figure out what we had. And we took the discipline to wait that month and understand what we had before we entered negotiations. Then we entered negotiations and they claimed their price didn't go up, but the calculations showed that it did. I don't want to get into the details. We had to get them to agree with us that we were on the same level in the same place. The bottom line is, because we were organized, because we stood our firm, we were knowledgeable about what we had, and we were serious in talking to them, we got a much better deal than what they started with real time. And if you want to elaborate, I know you know what I'm talking about, John, feel free, but that's a real time thing that really covers all the components of what we've been talking about.
How do you feel about situations where you negotiate a deal, you have a verbal deal, you have a written deal, and they say, oh no, we have to get this extra? I mean, how do you feel when you negotiate someone and they change the deal after it's agreed to? And then they change it again. I mean, how do you feel about those kind of negotiations?
Well, first of all, it does happen. So let's make sure we know that. But based on the comment I'm going to say, it's almost in conflict. I don't let that happen. Remember I said early on, one of the things you do is never put on the table what you can't deliver and only promise what you know you can do. So I put that both ways, and that happens. And the way I deal with that is I let them know that's not a deliverable. We're not going to accept it. But to tell you the truth, it goes into credibility, and that's the higher order. When someone does that to me, they're losing credibility, and I let them know.
Exactly. It happened. I might let it happen once, but if they try it in the negotiations, if they try it a second time, I say, no, that's the deal. Our word is our bond. My word is my bond. I don't ever go back after a deal's written and say, no, but I forgot, or I have to have something else. That's just that lacks integrity.
That's right.
Bob, you and I have negotiated a few times over the years. What do you look for in a company Bob, have you been asked to consult on negotiations? Is that in your role in franchising?
Yes, and sometimes what you get involved in as a consultant, I'm not even sure the word negotiation is the right one, but I think it is how to help people who run companies to make decisions that they don't want to make because personality is involved. And yet the person is toxic to the culture. And you have to help that person who is toxic identify whether they know they are or not, And if they don't know, that's one thing. And if they do know, that's another. But in the end, the decision has to be made to remove that person. And sometimes it's in also, I remember one time where a CEO of a multi-brand company wanted me to help him find a CEO because he wanted to move to chairman of the board. And he said, you just absolutely cannot recommend my daughter. And so I came back to him and said, I'm recommending your daughter. And here's why. And so he took my recommendation, and she is turned out after 25 years to not only be a growth leader, but a growth leader in the IFA.
I read an article, a very brief article recently about a negotiation that I just loved. It rang so true with me when because I've had 5,000 franchises and I've seen this so often. But a entrepreneur, founder, built a company, and he brought in a consultant. He brought in a Bob Gappa kind of guy, and he said, I need you to. We flattened out. We're not growing, and I need to get back and grow this company. And if you're not growing, you're dying. Yeah. And so he said, we need to get back on track. And so the consultant came in and said, well, you have these two of your executives are toxic or hurting the company, and they need to be changed. And the entrepreneur said to them, oh, I can't let them go. I mean, I just can't let them go. And the consultant said wisely, he said, then you're the problem. Then you CEO founder, you're the problem. So that was very insightful for me in this short 200-word article about management and even negotiating in that he wouldn't make that the right decision. So we're going to open for questions in a minute. First, we're going to Gordon D'Angelo. You wanted to make a couple comments before we open the floor for questions. Can we unmute Gordon? I guess that's a no. So while we're waiting for Gordon to try to get in, questions. Who has questions about that we can answer for you? We're going to go on. I'll tell some more stories.
All right. Okay. I don't have a question.
Mike,
I have more.
Am I unmuted? This is Gordon. Am I unmuted now?
Okay.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Matt, Gordon, hold on. Mike is talking.
Hey.
I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
We
Mike.
can hear you.
One of the things that I have used in many negotiations when they're not going in the right direction for both parties is to kind of cut it into parcels. In other words, agree to, let's try to solve this aspect of what is now a 3-part negotiation. Does anybody have success with that? And was I clear?
No, that was the question. I didn't understand the question, Mike.
The question is, in certain negotiations, when you know both parties are not getting to the point where they each would like to get to, has anybody cut the negotiation up into different parts, let's say 3 parts? And has anybody used that technique to and was successful with that?
Steve?
Yeah, so there's never a right or a wrong answer, but let me just tell you, remember I talked about getting over the hurdles.
Yes.
I don't know if it's 1 or 2 or 3 parts, but what I do know is if you segment it as a strategy, it's a great strategy. But just remember, if you segment it and you solve 2 of the 3, but you don't solve the 3rd, you're back to square 0. That's square 1, because if you've got to solve all 3 parts in the way I'm interpreting your example. So I prefer, when I parse it, I would do the opposite almost. I would parse it to say, well, here are the things that we don't have to work so hard on. And now let's focus on the real hurdle that's going to prevent us from doing a deal and knowing that's solved before I deal with the easier things. So I don't know if it's part 1, 2, or 3, but I just always caution, deal with the hurdle and get it out of the way, or you might as well not waste your effort.
So the most likely contentious part you want to get through first and foremost. Is that accurate?
That's right. That's the way I
Okay,
approach it. So
that makes sense.
Good.
Yeah, you want to look for deal breakers because that's a big time saver. If there's a deal breaker that you just can't live with, that one side can't live with, then you got to walk away. And so that's important to find out early. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Thanks,
Gordon?
guys.
Yes. First, let me say this is absolutely an amazing call. And if I ever go into negotiations, I'd like to take John, Steve and Bob with me, please. But John, I distinctly remember when you were, before you had that meeting with Walmart in Bentonville, you called a meeting of the executives. I was sitting in the room and you said, hey, we're going to Bentonville. Let's have some ideas. We're trying to negotiate. So you took a lot of input. I sat there and a lot of the ideas were absolutely ridiculous. Let me make that sentence. However, there were several points that were very valuable. And ultimately, I believe that you used them in a negotiation. And that goes back to what Steve was saying, is that, how important preparation is. And one thing, talking about preparation, Steve, I know you had all those years of experience, but the way that you bullet pointed your comments today, and I want you to know that I wrote every one of them down, I got to tell you, I was incredibly impressed. One of my favorite books I read of all time is You Can Negotiate Anything by Herb Cohen. And your commentary was as good as his best-selling books. The only other thing that I'd add is it was absolutely, and I got to tell you, as Bob said, I would sign up to pay for this course over and over again. That's how quality those points that you listed were. And the only other point that I ever learned, besides all your points that I just learned today, was that you can't negotiate anything you have to have. So if I'm negotiating for a business or a merger, don't have to have it. I'm negotiating, hey, Gordon, you need to take this pill to save your life and it costs $25 million. Can you sell it to me for 10 cents? No, you got to come up with the money. There's certain things you have to have and certain things you don't have to have. But with that being said, I got to say, congratulations, Steve. This is absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Well, let me add to that. And by the way, it's proverbial. Now he's going to ask for a raise kind of comment, Gordon, but thanks. I wanted to say one thing that one of my favorite people on the planet was a son of one of the directors when we founded Jackson Hewitt, and he was MIT PhD. And I convinced him to move from Boston down to Virginia Beach and be head of technology for a few years. And he had a career of about 6 years with us before he went back to Boston and back to that tech world. When he left, I said, what's the number one thing you learned while you were here? Well, in these 6 years, and he said, everything's negotiable. Steve, were you going to comment?
I was just going to say, make sure everyone knew that we did not pay for that last comment.
Okay. Nor will we. Other questions? So while we're waiting for a question, I'm going to tell you this is a little complicated. So hopefully I can make a complicated negotiations and what one of the biggest coups that I ever pulled in a negotiation, most successful, profitable things that happen. To try to simplify it, back in the 90s, there was refund anticipation loans, and Chemical Bank wanted to get into the industry, and it was at exactly the wrong time, and other banks were leaving the industry and they wanted to join, and they didn't have the technology or the experience to do it. So we did a joint venture with Chemical Bank. They had tested on their own for 1 year, and then this second year they were still on their own serving mom and pops, but we had a relationship at Jackson Hewitt where we did all the software, and we included them in our system, and they did loans with us. Well, in order for us to get a bigger share of the profits, we guaranteed the loans. So that gave us, in order to do that, we got more profit, a higher percentage of the profit. Well, this is 1995 tax season, the only time ever that loan business lost money during the tax season, and because of it's complicated, but it was IRS. The IRS caused the problem, a glitch that the bank was out, and we were out, and we owed them $1 million. Well, we went to them and said it was a bad time for us. We almost went bankrupt. The tax preparers didn't get paid. Our franchisees didn't get paid. Therefore, they didn't pay us. We lost money in the bank, and so we didn't have the $1 million. And they sued us, and we made a deal. And we made a deal very quickly in a couple of weeks that if they gave us all the receivables, we would give them $1 million over 6 months. By then it was December. We paid them in monthly payments, and it worked out. And what we asked for is something. We said, I'll tell you what, we will pay the $1 million if not only do you give us the receivables from our half of your operations, if you give the receivables from the other half, where we didn't have any relations, that was the mom and pops. And back in the 90s, they used to have cross collections. So when a customer came in, if he owed one of the bank's money, then he went to any other tax service, then they would collect the loan for them. So it turned, and they were getting out of the industry, and they did not believe that the receivables had any value. And so we did a deal where instead of just getting 3 million of receivables, we got 6 million. And so it was one of the most profitable deals we ever had, because they didn't understand that they had value. They didn't believe they had value. They just got out of the industry entirely. So to them, they had no value. So that was kind of thinking outside the box and using our skills and our expertise to be very beneficial.
So, John.
Steve or Bob, go ahead.
I do. I have a comment. One of the things that you embody, because I've known you a lot longer than I've known Steve, but one of the things that you embody is Drucker's principle that if you want to predict the future, just create it, because that's the way you predict it. And you're always focused on vision, the future, when you make a current decision. And you're always thinking about the futurity of a current decision. And so here's what I would say about you in negotiating. And I wrote this down so I'd get it right. They, the other party, individuals or more, they believe that they got more than they expected from the negotiation with you. But in fact, you got more than they believed they gave you, because you were looking at the future and not the present, and they're looking at the present. And the example you just gave embodies that definition about you. And I look forward to more and more finding that out about Steve, and I'm sure I will.
Yeah, and that's embodied in the fact that most executives are short-term oriented.
Yeah,
they're looking at this year's bonus or this month's bonus, these quarter's goals versus 5 years out or 3 years out, and they don't have a vision of that, or they're so focused on the future they lose, or on the present, they lose vision of the future.
Yeah.
Hey, John, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry about that. First of all, thanks, Steve, John, and Bob for this call. This is awesome. All right, I have a question. Do you ever go into a negotiation, or have you ever gone into a negotiation where you've gotten everything that you've asked for, literally everything? And the second part to that question is, have you ever gone into a negotiation and said to yourself, you know what, I'm going to ask for this. I might not get it, but hey, you never know. I'm going to ask for it regardless.
Okay. Steve, you want to take a crack at that first?
Well, sure. The first question, absolutely. I have gone into negotiations and gotten everything I've wanted. Also, I've agreed to settle for less than I wanted in a negotiation. But yes, if you follow the principles and you are organized, you are confident, did your homework, all the things we talked about, you can get what you went in there to get. You can negotiate the kind of a deal you wanted to get. So I feel very proud that more times than not, we've gotten what we want.
And Steve, have you asked for something that you never thought you would get and got it?
Many times, many times. So I think I don't know if that's a strategy or it's just inherent nature, but absolutely. Yes, and you're pleased when it happens. It's a nice result when that happens.
Did that happen in our negotiation with Thomson Reuters?
Absolutely.
Did you ask for something that you didn't expect them to give us?
Exactly, because we were the only one they ever did in the country giving us such a flat deal. And yeah, we asked for it. We never thought they would say yes. In fairness, the economy was down. We didn't factor that in. Yeah, we got that, and I never thought we would.
You know, when Joe, we had a situation where in the 90s, we had been turned down by Bank of America, or Nations Bank at the time it was called, and they had turned us down for a loan, for a line of credit. And so we went to a different bank, and about 3 years later, we were successful. We continued to grow, public company. They came to us and said, what would it take to get your business? And so we just gave them a list and bullet point, and they said, check, 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 check. Yes, we'll honor everything you've asked for. So, and that has to do with, when you walk away from a deal, one thing you never burn your bridges. You never burn your bridges, and because you don't know what's going to happen, what opportunity is going to present itself in the future. There are many times I try to do a deal with someone or some group or some company, and years later, it came to fruition. It didn't happen that day, that month, that year, but it came to fruition eventually. Last words, Bob. Any last words before we end this?
CEO's job is to create the future, not to make it happen.
Steve?
Well, I actually wrote down something I wanted to say at the end, and you kind of stole it a few minutes ago, but it's don't make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah, keep it simple. And too many negotiations get into the weeds, and they fall apart because there's big important points that are gotta have. They have to be solved, and you can get in this. I mean, people come to me and my negotiators, and because I have other people that do the negotiation often. I usually give them the guidance and they go negotiate, but they'll come back and they'll get caught up in this little teeny part of it that's unimportant. I said, give that up. You need to know what's important and what to expect. And you don't need to win on every count. You can give up stuff to get the best deal. I want to thank everyone. Next week is I'm incredibly excited. There's I call him the second best guerrilla marketer and customer service guy in the country. He owns the Savannah Bananas. If you want to be prepared for that meeting, you can Google Savannah Bananas. But he's an incredible marketing and customer service guru, and he'll be with us next week at, again, 2:15 on Wednesday. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Bye now.